Hi guys, I'm Allie, and you're not. Already starting off the video with a reference.
I'm Chevy Chase.
But welcome to my first ever attempt at a video essay. See, I've done deep dives before into different topics, but nothing quite like this. This is proven to be a very daunting task. But I first want to start off with introducing our topic today. So, Saturday Night Live, the most beloved show in the entire world, famously, totally not criticized for being liberal nonsense all the time. I think there have been plenty of people who have put in the work to disprove the notion that SNL has become more political than it used to be. I highly recommend watching Drew Gooden's video on this. He did a full deep dive. He watched an episode from every season and counted the amount of political sketches in each one, and he proved that the show's not any more political than it always has been. That's probably one of my favorite pop culture investigative type videos I've ever seen. I'm a big Drew Gooden fan. You've probably already watched his stuff, but specifically that has been the biggest inspiration for this video. Now, I didn't go back to watch this video because I didn't want to go into this with any other person's thought in my mind. I wanted this to be purely my thoughts and what I have to say. For this video, I will be focused on the most political segment of this entire show, Weekend Update. This is a segment that has been a signature part of SNL since the first episode of the first season in 1975. So this segment has been with the show for the entirety of its 48 seasons now. While the format has mostly stayed the same, the idea to have a running, bit segment, it's just an ongoing weekly thing. It's a parody of a news broadcast. It's remains something that is relevant today, even though this was an idea that started almost 50 years ago. And I think it's continued to be something that works. I think I'm not alone in saying that this is one of the parts of SNL that I think has stayed the most consistently funny, and I wanted to give it credit. This was originally just going to be a defense of Weekend Update, but it has turned into a fascination that I've grown to have for it for multiple factors. Broadcast journalism and politics are still essential parts of our daily lives. We go to that for our news, we're a very politics heavy world culture. Can't escape as much as you want to. But I think having something comedic to rip on those things is a very enlightening thing and a very human thing in a very heavy, dark, concerning world. So for this video, I'll be analyzing the different eras of Weekend Update, specifically from 3 different categories that I've decided. The first category is who the anchor is and how they're able to perform, but also, fulfill the essential comedic twist that they must have as, a Saturday Night Live Weekend Update anchor. Because it is a comedic segment at the end of the day, but they also are playing a character of an anchor. So I feel that it is important for them to perform as an anchor but also be funny while still in character, which I think most of them do successfully. The second thing I wanted to analyze from is the recognition of the specific historical events that were happening at this time. I did research on the specific events and things that were happening during these eras, these years, even specific times, like monthly breakdowns of what was happening these years, and how well they're able to utilize that into the segment, because obviously that's the driving force of Weekend Update. This includes not just politics, and it includes, world conflicts, pop culture, sports, most of the shows making fun of the different people in these different spheres, specifically like politicians, athletes, entertainers, artists. That is obviously the main driver. They tend to poke fun at those different aspects. But this also had me adopt a third way to analyze these, because some of the things they talk about in the show don't fit those categories at all. I found that a lot of the things that they've done in the show can come from more bizarre and creative places. A lot of the stories they tell are fabrications of the truth, maybe riffing on a silly photo that looks like they're doing something but isn't exactly what they're doing. But I noticed that some of the things were completely made up stories, sometimes utilizing fairy tale characters. They would just create something into some random, bizarre, goofy story. And I think that is a very fun aspect of Weekend Update. Now, before I break everything down, before I get started on season 1, I would like to tell you my qualifications for this commentary. In fact, I don't think there's ever been anything that I've been more In fact, I don't think there's ever been something that I've been more qualified for in my entire life. I am incredibly equipped to be doing this analysis, and let me tell you why. I'm currently a junior in college. I'm studying political science and journalism. Both things are important in the aspects of Weekend Update. I have hands-on experience in both of these fields. Not a ton, obviously, because I'm 20. I would consider myself pretty knowledgeable. I'm pretty passionate about these things, and I think it's important to have this lens while looking at a segment like this. I've also been a pop culture fan my whole life. I've always kept up with music, movies, TV, current events. It's always been something I've liked to follow, especially when it intersects with politics, which is exactly what this show is. It's entertainment mixed with news and politics. Now, I have also grown up with parents who are pretty big fans of SNL, more so the actors who, originated from this show. I'm familiar with a lot of the famous sketches that came from SNL, but mostly the movies that exist because of sketches that originated on the show or because of actors who originated on the show.
And now, Weekend Update with Chevy Chase.
You think it's mine? That's not possible. It's called a strap. Hi, I'm Chevy Chase, and you're not. The top story tonight. In the middle of the current energy crisis, Americans are struggling to fill their car with gas. I, however, am full of it. Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead. President Gerald Ford released a statement today explaining what he plans to do with the White House enemy list. He said, quote, "As I am a man of culture, I plan to weigh each person on this list and pair them into boxing matches," unquote. The date for these boxing matches has not yet been determined. Tensions with the Soviet Union are once again rising. Brezhnev claims he's been, quote, "a very good boy," unquote. President Ford has yet to respond to this, saying that he needs, quote, "post-nut clarity," unquote, in order to respond to this statement. As the socioeconomic state of the world becomes more dire, people are desperate for a hero. To speak more on this, here is Lorraine Newman reporting from Times Square.
Thank you, Chevy. On a cold winter night in the seeming aftermath of the Prez 37 pandemic, we're all looking for a hero. New York City happens to be the home to a friendly neighborhood superhero named Spider-Man. Now, this hero wears a tight little red, white, and blue suit, perfect representation to Americans everywhere that might be feeling down. Now, I have never seen him, but if you run into him, tell him I live at 6969 I Won't You Avenue. Now, the person who does this...
Lorraine, Spider-Man's a fictional character. He doesn't actually live in New York.
Oh! Back to you, Chevy.
Last week, Weekend Update presented a story about former President Nixon's involvement in the Watergate scandal. Here to reply to that story is Daily Wire writer Dan Aykroyd. Cancel culture has won yet again, this time taking place in the Oval Office, where it has taken over America. These bleeding heart liberals have once again turned a moment of guys being dudes into something they're triggered about. Clearly, these calls that these communists were so mad about were just
prank calls. It was just a prank, something that can only happen in the freest country in the world and not communist China. I only hope our nation will soon be free from these comedy dictators. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Alright, now let's get into season 1. Now first I'm going to introduce to you the important people you need to know for this specific era. Hello.
Hey, bestie.
I now have a co-anchor. This is important to do right now, though I will only introduce the people you need to know as the season they begin to enter. I also leave out people who don't really appear on Weekend Update. This is purely people who are important to this segment and who make appearances I feel are notable. So first we have Chevy Chase, who became a huge actor known for National Lampoon's Family Vacation and Caddyshack, though around the 90s he began to star in movies that were flops. Now, if you can't tell by the way I've been talking, I'm a little biased against him. I'm rooting against Chevy Chase. I can't tell you exactly why, but something about him, I'm just rooting against him. I'm sorry. Okay, editors, no, it's me. It's just, I'm not going to show my face because there's early snot pouring out my nose right now and I'm sick as I'm editing this. But come to find out, I've talked to a lot of people after I filmed this segment and just like everything I had to say about Chevy Chase, and I guess my suspicions were correct. And if you were to ask most people Chevy Chase worked with, he is in fact an asshole, so I guess always trust your gut. But we'll get into how he is. He is the main anchor in season 1. He is on the show only from season 1 until the 6th episode of season 2, where he leaves to host a night show, which inevitably fails. I think they canceled it after just a few episodes, which to me is really funny. But we'll get into that when we get to season 2, where he does leave. He is the first person to ever do Weekend Update, so he sets the precedent for how it's gonna go. He's the guinea pig, and I gotta give him credit for that. I also want to mention Lorraine Newman, who makes appearances on Weekend Update. She was a cast member from season 1 until season 5, usually playing the same character. She's usually the newscaster that is, in the outfield interviewing people outside. She's not in the studio. She plays that stereotypical newscaster voice. She has a few other characters, but it's mainly this outfield newscaster. I think she has like 1 or 2 other characters that she plays, but she mostly does that. Next is Garrett Morris, who was on the show from season 1 to season 5. He is all over the place in terms of Weekend Update. He plays an abundance of different characters. I mean that in, a nice way. It's not his fault. He does a bunch of different characters, some of them real, some of them fake, He does editorials, he reports on weather, sports, and science. He is the only black cast member, and that led to a lot of turmoil for him for reasons I will get into, because it mainly started to affect him in season 3. And then John Belushi, who was a cast member from season 1 to season 4. He doesn't make a ton of appearances on Weekend Update the entirety that he's on the show. It's usually editorials where he gets very passionately mad about something, usually to the point of screaming, where he needs to be calmed down. Even though he's not on very much, I think those still are some of my favorite moments on Weekend Update just because of how ridiculous they are. Then Gilda Radner, who was a cast member from season 1 to season 5. May she rest in peace. She is hilarious. I love her. She's definitely one of my favorite cast members, if not my favorite of this era. In Weekend Update, she plays an abundance of characters. These are often editorials or responding to letters that they get sent in. The most notable characters, the most famous ones, are Emily Latella and Rosanna Dana, which I will get more into. Emily Latella is the one that is mainly in season 1. Jane Curtin, who was a cast member from season 1 to season 5. In season 1, she only comes on to do editorials, usually where she is mocked by Chevy, but she becomes very important because she becomes the main anchor from season 2 to season 5. And then Dan Aykroyd, who was a cast member from season 1 to season 4, he doesn't appear too much in the first season, but he will later become someone very important to Weekend Update, though in season 1, he also does editorials, usually playing a geeky man, sometimes a scientist, and ranting about some subject, political, whatever's going on in that era type of rant. So let's get into the content of season 1. So Chevy Chase is the sole host during this season, and into the first episode of season 2. I'll get into where that changes when we get to season 2. But in terms of just this season, I like his delivery. I think he's definitely a good fit for this segment. He has a famously fatherly presence.
You under the covers right now?
Which, makes him have a more serious tone, but also a goofy type of delivery. I think it's a good fit. And since he's the first person ever to do Weekend Update, I feel like I need to give him credit in that aspect. There's obviously pros and cons to being the first to do something, but I imagine it's difficult to be the first person to try out something like this, work out the kinks, because it's never been done before and he has no one to work off of. Obviously, it's nice to have someone to work off of, but also he's not being compared to anyone. There's pros and cons, but I think in terms of being the guinea pig, he does a good job with being the first to try it out. So I'll first start with the praises I have for him. This season, and Chevy in particular, are very consistent. There's a lot of running jokes that makes each episode easier and easier to watch because you kind of get used to the format, you know what to look forward to, you know what jokes you're gonna see, you kind of get excited how they're gonna twist it. And also just the time this takes place. This is in 1975. They have a lot of content to work with. I don't know if you are very familiar with some of the stuff that was happening in this era. The 70s is definitely one of my favorite era of American politics to learn about just because of how much of a mess it was, which, makes it a great time to start a segment like this. He and the writers of SNL do a very good job at using these events. And I also feel that this season is very good at balancing how they use characters and cameos, because one of the big things in Weekend Update is the characters and people who will come on to talk about certain things. Obviously, there's been a lot of famous people that have come from that, but it's still strong in keeping Chevy the main focus of the show without it being too Chevy heavy. Bars. I want to talk about some of the running bits because I feel like that is the main way to understand what was going on in that season. A lot of these are like the highlights of things I thought that were the funniest. So the bit that occurs most often is Chevy receiving phone calls from a presumed lover. This starts on episode 3, where Chevy will begin each episode of Weekend Update talking on the phone. You don't hear the other voice, but he says innuendos that you can presume are about the sex he's having.
Remember when... I gotta go. 2 weeks late. That could be emotional. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it, okay? Okay. Goodbye, Barbara. Margaret, I'm sorry. You under the covers right now? Get a shower?
There's even one episode where he's on the phone and, he just looks sad and puts the phone down. I'm assuming he got ghosted. They drag on this bit. Since he's only on the show for one season, it doesn't really have time to get old, so I feel like this was a pretty good bit. Every time without fail, he acts surprised that he is on the phone while the camera is rolling. I just think is really ridiculous, but pretty funny. Another bit is weed, marijuana, pot, the devil's lettuce. This comes from police claims of killer weed. Sounds familiar. Police panic about certain drugs. I won't get into that, but times don't change. The main running joke of it is he offers to ease the stress that people feel about this. He puts his address on screen for people to send him weed for him to test to see if there's bad substances in it. Obviously, he just wanted free weed.
The FBI claims that a huge shipment of grass, which they are calling killer dope, has been smuggled into New York City. In an effort to aid the FBI in its investigation, Weekend Update is undertaking its own analysis of marijuana sent to us anonymously by any viewers who may be worried. Chevy Chase, Apartment 12, 827 West 81st Street, New York City, 10053.
But I think this joke was ahead of its time. I hear a lot of jokes like this made nowadays. Politics around weed have gotten a little better, and it's been legalized in more and more states, but I think the general stigma around it hasn't changed too much. I think this is a joke that's aged very well. So they also talk about Francisco Franco, who was a Spanish nationalist leader known as a caudillo. I hope I said that right. And good news for them, he died in, I think, November 1975 while this show was going on. They were already poking fun at him right before he died, but oh my god, were they eating it up when he did die? Because that became the whole thing about him. They would just take a moment almost every episode to be like, and Francisco Franco is still dead. That's the joke. The joke is that he died, and that's really it. They'll just be like, this guy's still dead. Nice.
Well, after a long illness, Generalissimo Francisco Franco died Wednesday. Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead. Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still valiantly holding on in his fight to remain dead. That the Generalissimo's condition is still very grave, but, and I would like to emphasize this, it is stable at this time.
You know, they comment on a lot of controversial leaders, but this one is simple yet effective. It would kind of get me every time. You know, it's quick, it's shocking. Another thing I'd like to mention is the advertisements they have. This becomes a thing that runs through at least the era that I've watched so far. They create these fake sponsors and advertisements. The one that appears the most often in this season is Spud Beer. This leads to a bunch of bizarre segments and them promoting Spud Beer. He even pours it all over himself in season 6.
Spud beer. But I drink it and I pour it on my suit.
I don't know if it was supposed to be sensual, but it kind of felt like it was trying to be. But I'll take it as funny, you know, whatever. It's wacky, wild, shocking. So some of the other sponsors were Middle American Van Lines, Tri-Opener, Jamatol, and Geronimo. These aren't like my favorite jokes that they make, but I think they add a little something different to the show. Another bit is the drawings they have. They make drawing recreations of stories. So how these go down. It will show a series of drawing and there will be a nasally narration over it. Most of these are about pretty serious events. A lot of the times they're about trials that are happening in court, particularly famous ones at the time. The Patty Hearst one is one they did. I think they did it a few times with the drawing recreations, but it's supposed to be just like a nasally narrator voice. But then, you know, the story ends and you just see Chevy like, Patty Hearst trial. That's exactly what he sounds like. That was actually a very good impression. Like, I nailed that.
Lynette Squeaky Fromm was sentenced to life today for her attempt on President Ford's life. Her for Weekend Update reporting.
Again, not my favorite thing, but I think it adds something new to change. It's a change of pace, and, you know, I can always support a change of pace. Alright, now I'm going to talk about the main story topics. I'm going to try to make this as interesting as possible, but I feel like it's important to mention the political events that were happening at this time and how they incorporated that into the show. So the first one, which I think was probably one of the biggest things that happened during the 70s, was the energy crisis. Season 1 takes place in 75, which is right smack dab in the middle of this crisis because it lasted the entire decade. There was a shortage of gas during this time. People are having trouble filling their tank. They could only go at certain times, and also prices spiked because there was a scarcity. It has a lot of mentions, not just in this season, but throughout the rest of this era, just because it takes place during this era. This leads to them making fun of gas companies, ExxonMobil being one of those, which I will take ExxonMobil slander as much as I can. Oh my god, rip their ass. Also, gas price jokes, sounds familiar. And also, this leads to a few editorials, one specifically from Dan Aykroyd. I'm pretty sure he acts as a scientist. He just rambles about his distraught with the energy crisis.
The energy crisis is upon us, and yet most citizens are still unaware of its implications and ultimate impact. We know in our collective subconscious that it cannot continue, yet we go home.
It's pretty funny. I don't know. Anything Dan Aykroyd does where he's just like some angry man moping about the state of things, I'm gonna laugh. This is easily my favorite thing they talk about because there is so much content here. The 1976 presidential election. This season took place from October 1975 to July 1976. So this was the build-up to the 1976 election. Particularly, the primaries are the main focus that we see in this season. The content. There are so many characters involved in this presidential election. Oh my god. First off, incumbent Gerald Ford. Now, if you don't know much about Gerald Ford, he was a particularly controversial character at this time, and his choice to run for re-election was definitely a choice, considering he is the first and only president to neither be elected to the office of vice president or president. This happened because of Watergate. Both Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned and President Nixon resigned from their positions because of the Watergate scandal, which is also just, even though this season takes place like years after Watergate, it's still content because there's still convictions being made and there's still things coming out about it. Oh my god, so much tea. I love it. It's drama. I love it. So Gerald Ford got into both of these positions because of resignations. He was not voted in at all. So his choice to run for re-election is pretty funny to me. He wasn't even the only character in this. Oh no. So President Jimmy Carter, who would end up winning the election, was also mentioned. He is the front runner for the Democrats during this presidential election. But honestly, it's kind of hard to make fun of Jimmy Carter. He is like the most vanilla man. He's just like some farmer from the South, and he just seems like a nice dude. It's kind of hard to make fun of Jimmy Carter without stretching a little bit. So most of the time, they just go over his family or people associated to him more than they actually go after him, which I think is funny. Like, I love a good reach, and they are really reaching when they're trying to make fun of Jimmy Carter. That's the real hater attitude. You gotta reach to hate, and I think that's what they did with Jimmy Carter, and I really respect that. There wasn't too much content coming from the Democratic National Convention. The only really funny joke that came from the DNC was them talking about the candidates for the Democratic nominee, and then them just showing a picture of clowns.
An impressive show of party strength and unity. All 11 announced Democratic candidates for the presidential nomination met in Washington with their campaign managers to discuss strategy this weekend.
Easy jab, but pretty funny, I'm not gonna lie. I like a good simple joke. The Republican primary was 100% way funnier than the Democrats. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, that's probably usually how it is, but this election considerably so. There was one other standout character who is running in the primaries for the Republican nomination. And this is none other than a person who would be a future president, Ronald Reagan. I'm always ready for some Reagan slander. Fuck that guy. I hate that guy. This era of Reagan was very funny because he was so pathetic, because he is just full of copium. But I guess he does end up winning at some point and forever changing how the presidency works, which I'm not going to give him credit for right now. I just want to talk about how pathetic he was in this time just to make myself feel good. But this man was trying so hard to become president. He was just such a mess, like almost messier than Trump. Like, I don't think anyone talks about like how much of a mess and diva this guy was. One of the running gags in season 1 is red dye number 2, because this is a thing that the FDA is talking about, how it's like not good for you, how they're like discontinuing it. That becomes a thing to make fun of Reagan and give it to me, I want to hear it. So they poke jokes at him saying that he dyes his hair even though he claims not to dye his hair. So they're saying he uses red dye number 2. You know, he's sad that they're discontinuing red dye number 2, but get his ass, Chevy. I'm not rooting for you, Chevy, but in this case, I'm rooting for you. The New York City financial crisis. Now, this one's particularly important, especially for SNL and Weekend Update, because they film SNL in New York City. All the actors live there, so they talk about this one a good amount because it does affect them. This crisis had actually been going on for a very long time before, but it really escalated, especially right when the show started, because the city went into bankruptcy, which is a big deal because that is the financial capital of the country, if not the world. So that's a pretty big deal. A lot of tough political decisions were made. I can't say what was right, what was wrong. I wasn't there. I don't know the details. This led to President Ford and his administration loaning over $2 billion to the city of New York to help it recover. I guess that's how desperate they were and how much of a big deal this was. This leads to a lot of funny editorials and people being mad, like, our tax money is going to Wall Street. And they also make fun of Nelson Rockefeller, who was President Ford's vice president, who also was a very questionable billionaire from New York, if Rockefeller sounds familiar. And he was a close peer to President Nixon. So great guy we're working with here. I don't know if he had correlation to the financial crisis, but I'm just assuming because he was a billionaire from New York City that he's responsible. I don't know. I'm pinning it on him. What is he going to do? He's dead now. It's his fault. This was an international conflict happening in Angola, which is a country in northern Africa. They don't really comment too much on exactly what's happening, which I think is probably for the best, especially some white dude in the 70s. I'm pretty glad they didn't go too deep into a conflict in Africa. But they did make a pretty good pun out of, the name Angola. They use Angola as a pun, and this leads to them trying to call into Angola for comments on the conflict, but they end up calling into something else that sounds similar to Angola but is not Angola. The first one is Angelo's Pizza, which is just a guy in a pizza shop in New York just spinning dough.
Hello. Angelo.
As a true Italian New York man, I gotta respect it. And then they call Angela, who is Jane Curtin's roommate, presumably.
Hello, Angola.
Angela's not here right now. Who's this?
I don't know. That one was a little bizarre, and I'm like, okay, you're stretching a bit for, commenting on this, but also not being weird about, I don't know. It was a thing. That was one thing I felt like it was worth mentioning because they do it a lot. Alright, important characters to this season. I'm not going to comment on every cameo, but these were particularly the ones that stood out that definitely became an essential part of this season. So Lorraine Newman, I think this season utilized her the best out of any season of Weekend Update. Though I like some of the later seasons better, I think it's harder for her to stand out in the later seasons because there are more dominant personalities introduced. But she has a lot of really funny moments this season. She's like the outfield news reporter who goes out to the scene and reports on things. The first one she does is the murder at Blaine Hotel, which is usually her being pretty awkward, standing there awkwardly interviewing weird people who are there. I think she's technically not supposed to be. I think she snuck in too.
Chevy, I'm standing outside a room on the 15th floor of the Blaine Hotel, where number 38 in a series of grisly and bizarre murders has occurred just over an hour ago. Lorraine Newman reporting.
This isn't the best thing she does, but this was the first thing, and there are updates to this story in different episodes, so I felt it was worth mentioning. My personal favorite is her man on the street type segment. Was very ahead of its time because I don't really know if this was a thing. She was out in Times Square, asking random people their opinions on abortion, which I guess isn't too wild of a thing nowadays, but I'm just assuming in the 70s some weirdo with a camera and a microphone asking you about abortion on the streets of New York, probably pretty bizarre and was probably pretty funny at the time.
1, have you ever had an abortion?
Nah, I haven't.
And number 2, if under the right circumstances, would you have an abortion?
Nah, I wouldn't know.
And then she was in Times Square again, but to report on New Year's Eve, and she was confused why no one was there, and that was because she was there 11 days early, which was unbelievably stupid, but I thought it was really funny.
Again, inexplicably, relative inactivity here in Times Square. Chevy, it's December 20th.
And the rain isn't New Year's Eve, normally on December 31st.
Next, this is easily my favorite character from this season, played by my favorite cast member from this era, Gilda Radner. This character is Emily Latella. So Gilda Radner tragically died in her 40s from cancer, which is really upsetting because she was definitely one of the best to do it. She plays characters so well. I don't really see people play characters like she does. Her appearances follow a formula, but oh my god, does that formula work? So usually she will appear at the end of a weekend update to give a heated, passionate editorial about, something she feels is wrong in society. But the twist is, she always mishears things. So she gets mad about things that don't exist. For example, she gets mad about the Eagle Rights Amendment, saying why should eagles have the same rights as Americans?
What's all this fuss I hear about an Eagle Rights Amendment? But I wouldn't like to sit next to one on a bus. The next thing you know, we'll have to give rights to pigeons. Equal rights?
Yes.
For who?
For people, Miss Latella.
Oh, well, that's reasonable.
Yes.
Never mind.
Pretty funny. Obviously, the real thing was the Equal Rights Amendment, which is a very important piece of legislation that resulted from the civil rights movement. Another one of my favorites was the presidential erection, obviously supposed to be the presidential election.
About the 1976 presidential erection. Not for presidents who can afford to pay for their own erections. I can't believe the way things are turning out in this country.
That's just so stupid. I love it. I wish my job was to rant about presidential erections. And then another good one was the death penalty, obviously meant to be the death penalty, but she went on a rant saying, deaf people already go through enough. They don't deserve to be penalized even more. And then at the end of every editorial, Chevy would be like, actually, the story was about this, not that. And then she would end by going, oh, that's very different. Never mind. Exactly like that.
Oh, that's very different.
Yes.
Never mind.
So I am going to end with my criticisms of this season and with Chevy. So Chevy struggles with the art of being subtly funny. He often has moments where he tries to be quippy or kooky, but it often is something that falls flat for him. This happens while people are giving editorials. He will sit beside them, kind of behind them, and he does a Jim Carrey style mocking of them. I don't know, I can't do it well, but I don't think he does it well either. The one he does the most is the
Eaten or allowed to die on its own. Frankly, I haven't.
that one. Something like that. So the first person he did this mocking to was Jane Curtin in episode 4, where she acts as a congresswoman who is against the aid given to New York City. And for that reason, I thought it was initially a misogynist joke, like him making fun of a woman talking.
Says that the federal government cannot arrest a natural process simply by shining the apple to make it.
But then in the next episode, he did the same thing to Dan Aykroyd, who is ranting about the energy crisis.
We have been taught from generation to generation about the endless abundance of America's wealth.
So I guess he's not misogynist, he is just annoying. One of the cringiest things they do in this season is they will end the segment by repeating the top story for a certain population. The worst one, and the one they did the most often, was repeating it for the Hard of Hearing, which featured Garrett Morris as the headmaster for the New York School for the Hard of Hearing. He would just scream the top story very loudly. Just not funny to me personally. Doesn't sit well with me. I gotta say, it's not even funny. You didn't even try. You're just yelling to own the deaf people. That's fucked up. But to give credit, there are a few funny ones. One that I liked was where he repeats the story for dead people, where he just sits there in silence and then concludes. That was pretty funny. And there was also one where they repeated the story for wet people, and it's just them repeating it in the shower. I'll take it. So overall, I'd say that this season is a great precedent for what Weekend Update should be. though Chevy is not my favorite person and I am not rooting for him. He is probably the perfect example for the standard of what a Weekend Update anchor should be. This whole season in general, I think, is a pretty good example of just like mid, not in a derogatory way, just like average standard what Weekend Update should be. There are definitely people who end up doing it better than him. There are definitely people who end up doing it worse than him. I think he's a pretty good example of a good but not great Weekend Update anchor.
And now, Weekend Update with Jane Curtin. Before I begin the broadcast tonight, I would like to respond to some comments that I've gotten. Many of you have been saying that you miss Chevy Chase as anchor because he was sexier and funnier than I am. However, I would like to offer a counterpoint. I have boobs and I do not care. Our top story tonight: anti-porn activists have rallied in Times Square in an effort to ban its creation and commodification. Many of these activists claim that porn dehumanizes women as objects. When asked about this, a protester replied, quote, I don't disagree that women are property meant to be objectified. I just don't like when they do it to themselves, unquote. Elton John has revealed that he is bisexual in a recent interview. The Tiny Dancer singer has been facing speculation for his clockable outfits for years. When asked if he prefers men or women, he replied, quote, I don't know, I'm just trying to grill, unquote. President Jimmy Carter has just been inaugurated. In his speech, he claims that in his first 100 days, he will find out why the chicken crossed the road, what the deal is with airline food, and what is up dog. More on this as his presidency continues. As St. Patrick's Day approaches, many of us are ready to dress in green and drink our weight in beer. However, many Irish people have began to claim they find these stereotypes offensive. Here to comment is John Belushi. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane. You know, it's that time of year again, being constantly told things like, ooh, you're all alcoholics, kiss me, I'm Irish, eating enough potatoes for your ancestors who didn't get to. Now, this really frustrates me to my core. All these assumptions, these stereotypes, they're all true. My family is all alcoholics, all of them, babbling slobs. And yeah, everyone does want to kiss me. I'm Irish and they want to kiss me. Mwah. And bye, oh boy, oh man, do we be eating potatoes. Double the amount for those who didn't get to. Yeah, they fucking died and I'm making up for it. John. No! I yield my time. John Belushi, everyone. And that's all we have for tonight. Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Now it is time to talk about Season 2 of Weekend Update. That was my best Jane Curtin impression, but... So this is the first change in anchors, though it is a bit weird at first because the first episode of this season is done with Chevy Chase once again as the sole anchor, but this is easily the cringiest one I've seen so far. I don't think any of them has made my skin crawl like this one. Not a single joke was funny. There was a transphobic joke.
Tennis without balls.
And he also tried to joke about Chairman Mao.
He will be replaced by imitation Mao.
And it was just not funny. This was the main reason why I am not rooting for him. But then episode 2 and episode 3, he steps away because of a back injury when, you know, I'm pretty sure other things were brewing. I think that's what most people think. So Jane Curtin steps in as his fill-in during these episodes, so it's just her. Nothing too crazy happens during these episodes, but then he returns episode 4 and him and Jane co-anchor, and then it's revealed on episode 6 that he is actually leaving to start his own night show, which surprise, surprise, failed miserably. I'm pretty sure it was not even a season. I'm pretty sure it got canceled like within a month, but I don't care. Farewell. It is Queen Jane Curtin's time to shine. So I also forgot to mention that they do have a new cast member this season. You may know him. His name is Bill Murray. He might be a little too obscure for some of you, but he doesn't really appear too much in this season, but he becomes more important in the next season. So just remember that he's part of the cast now. So Jane gives a more absurd delivery to Weekend Update. And I don't know if this is because of my bias from knowing her mostly from the Coneheads, but I think just generally her eyes and her energy are very alien-like. That's probably why she worked for the Coneheads. Her delivery is definitely what I would describe as out of this world. She seems like she's not meant to be on this planet. I've been calling her the Aubrey Plaza of her time. I think that's a pretty good comparison because she has a very dry delivery. She seems like not from this planet, and she is still very funny. And she never breaks character. She always is a very controlled chaos. I really like that in comedy. She has the ability to do things subtly but still make it funny. She can tell the most ridiculous headline without breaking character even remotely. Not even like a snicker, nothing. Like she does not break. And it's really impressive. Another thing I find very impressive is when she does slip up, she does a very good job in making it seem like it was nothing.
Hello? Members of the Plains Baptist, hello!
She can either recover very well or incorporate it to make it seem like part of the story. She improvises, but she can also recover very well. It definitely makes for a better host when you can, mess up and it's okay. The season did a pretty good job at smoothly transitioning from Chevy as host to Jane as host. It doesn't change too much in its style, its format, how it does things, what it talks about. The best thing that Jane improved on from Chevy's time as anchor is definitely her ability to do edgy jokes or jokes that have the potential to be offensive. Chevy just could not do that. White guy in the 70s, I don't know what I was thinking, but I like to wish for the best for everyone. I don't want people to be assholes. And if he's not an asshole anymore, which I haven't been given a reason to believe, I'd accept it. But Jane is successfully able to walk that line for the most part. But also, she generally doesn't have those types of jokes on her segment. The only one that really stood out to me was her talking about Elton John coming out as bisexual at the time. That just led to this goofy joke about him announcing he was bisexual, half of it on a men's magazine cover and the other half in a women's magazine cover.
The statement was made this week in a two-part interview, part one in Rolling Stone magazine, part two in Women's Wear Daily.
It's a pretty stupid joke, but it's not like offensive or dehumanizing. It's just goofy, and as a bi person myself, I got pretty excited that a comedian in the 70s was able to do a bi joke that was funny and didn't make me feel weird. So nice job, Jane. Sincerely, a bisexual. Generalissimo Franco Francisco, he is still dead during this season, and they don't let you forget that. Even in Chevy's last episode, he receives a phone call. The dead Franco, the late Franco Francisco. I don't know. They then continue their commentary on the 1976 presidential election. The previous season took time, mostly during the primaries, as the two main nominees were still getting settled upon. Now, starting this season, it's starting to wrap up. It begins in the months right before the election, and it goes into the election, into Jimmy Carter's first months as president. Jimmy Carter wins, spoiler alert. But leading up to it, they feature fake ad campaigns from both incumbent Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter.
And equal justice for all Americans. A full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
4 more years.
They do cover it quite a bit because it's pretty easy to make fun of Ford. Though once Carter is elected, they kind of step away from federal politics and making fun of characters in politics. I think generally because there wasn't too much to talk about or make fun of. I can't really think of a way to make fun of Jimmy Carter on a segment like that. He doesn't really give content in terms of things to make fun of. I mean, I'm sure there's something, but it just wasn't the most interesting thing to do on Weekend Update, and I think they were smart for stepping away from that and, you know, exploring different types of humor. They did make fun of his mom quite a few times. If anything, I think I've seen more jokes about his mom than I've seen about him, even in later seasons. But honestly, I even find those kind of boring, because why are you making fun of his mom? I'd much rather see a politician get shit on than, like, their mom, because she was just kind of like some farmer girl from the South. Like, I don't know. Apparently she was hanging out with, like, some sketchy people or something. I don't know. They did what they had to do for content. I gotta respect that. So this has led to them completely making their own creative stories based on things that exist in, like, pop culture but aren't really things that would happen. One of the things was Smokey the Bear. This was in Jane's first episode as the sole anchor of Weekend Update, where she's at the desk and Lorraine's out covering Smokey the Bear's funeral. He is then cremated. Isn't it ironic? And then Lorraine mentions, like, all the other mythical creatures who attended the funeral and what they had to say about his death.
It was a touching service attended by close friends as well as celebrities including Bambi, Thumper, Peter Cottontail, Red Fox, Max Baer, and Beaver Cleaver. Smokey's last request was to be cremated.
This definitely was a story that caught me off guard, since I don't think they did anything like this before. I'm here for the ride. I like that they're doing things that kind of don't make sense. I love stupid humor. So another story they do like this is about Morris the cat. Now, I don't know who the fuck Morris the cat is, but this story was still funny. This actually was something that was in a few different episodes. It's about this cat who is on his last life. So Jane proposes viewers to send in different ideas for how Morris can commit Roblox. It's a bit out there, but you know, if you're gonna do an edgy joke like that, at least do it about a cat that doesn't exist. I gotta give you credit there. Another very notable thing that happens this season is a John Belushi editorial that has become a famous rant of his. This is on episode 13. This was around St. Patrick's Day that year.
Top of the morning to you. Kiss the Blarney Stone.
It was particularly about his feelings on the saying the luck of the Irish. It's a bit bizarre and it doesn't really make any sense. He kind of goes on about how the luck of the Irish is bullshit and it's not true because of the IRA doing bombings at the time.
Some guy comes up to you and says, "Hey, is that a bomb I hear ticking?" Then BAM! That's the luck of the Irish for you. Look, potato famine. Oh, my Irish mother, I will live must be heaven because my mother comes from there.
It's a little odd to me, but it's become a famous skit of his, and they do the classic thing where he gets really mad, screaming, thrashing, and then Jane tries to calm him down, and then that leads to him getting more mad, and just, you know, the dynamic. People like that dynamic. Wait, what sign was John Belushi? He was an Aquarius. And Jane was a Virgo. That makes sense to me. Okay, off topic. Belushi also is away for a few episodes because of a back injury. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that actually happened. But he calls Jane in one episode complaining that no one in the cast had even mentioned it. Okay. Lorraine Newman has a pretty funny moment in Times Square where she finds out that Rosh Hashanah is not a huge celebration in New York City, and in fact, it is a holiday that Jewish families celebrate in the comfort of their homes.
Lorraine, that's usually celebrated privately in homes and at synagogues, not in Times Square.
I thought it seemed a little quiet.
And her realization of that was pretty funny. Emily Latella makes further appearances this season, and I am a fan of her dynamic with Jane. I think it's funnier than her dynamic with Chevy, because when Emily Latella was on with Chevy, I feel like he kind of didn't know what to do with her. It was kind of him just like... Whereas Jane shows disgust and frustration better. She'll be like...
Hi,
can't wait to hear this gem.
And I think that makes for a funnier segment and dynamic with Emily. You know, she's already a funny character on her own, but when she's put in a good dynamic in the right setting, good stuff. So the best moments this season for her were her rant on endangered feces, which I find funny because poop. I like poop jokes. Poop funny.
What's all this fuss I keep hearing about endangered feces?
What's so funny?
Oh, come on, you old chicksa.
Not feces, species.
Oh, I must have gotten carried away. Never mind.
And she also went off about how she doesn't think Puerto Rico should be considered a state. Pretty weird, but you know, I don't know what line of thinking led to her to think that that was what people were actually saying, but you know, I'm not going to complain because it's not real. They made it up as a joke. Dan Aykroyd isn't really in this season too much, but he does call in playing as President-elect Jimmy Carter after he just got elected. You'll never guess what they talked about. Yes, Generalissimo Franco Francisco, who's still dead, by the way. Garrett Morris does a story about Michelangelo's David. I really like this story because it's about how the statue was circumcised as a prank.
Someone damaged Michelangelo's Pietà. When the gods weren't looking, circumcised the statue of David.
Which is so stupid, but oh my god, is that funny? That is like a really funny idea, and I love that. And it's completely made up, and this did not happen. But, you know, if this did happen, it would be a news story, so like, believable to me. Garrett Morris also plays Muhammad Ali in a few episodes. He becomes someone they poke fun of a lot, especially in this season and the next season, because this is when his career is slowing down a bit, I'm pretty sure, because he's not fighting anymore. So I think a lot of it's poking fun at him trying to stay in the spotlight, trying to maintain a presence. So one of the episodes is, you know, about the release of Rocky and about how he's mad that they made a movie about this character named Rocky when he was right there. You know, I just thought it was pretty funny. He's like, I could beat Rocky, just...
Yeah, I am the champ of the world. To all this is known. Now let's talk about this turkey, Sylvester Stallone. To go make a movie and call a champ Rocky, some call it genius, but I calls it cocky.
He's just annoyed with a different boxer getting more fame than him. Though this does lead to where Garrett Morris's place on the SNL cast gets upsetting. It was very bad for his mental health, but I can literally see myself like how terrible they just typecasted him. They typecasted him because he was, you know, the black man on the show. I'm going to get into it more later because this really escalates in season 3, but you can already see from the first 2 seasons that he is always casted as real black celebrities, and they always put him on stories that revolve around black issues, which I imagine is pretty frustrating and tiring as the only black actor on the SNL cast in the 70's. I don't know how much the other actors had influence on it, but I'm gonna assume most of this is the fault of the executives at NBC and the people who ran SNL rather than, like, you know, the other cast members. I don't know, but that's who I'm gonna assume is at fault for this. It's definitely questionable. A lot of the treatment of both people of color and women on this show definitely had me raising my eyebrow a bit and had me very concerned. I'll get into the misogyny in a second, but I just wanted to note that this is definitely a point where I can see the racial casting getting weird in terms of Garrett Morris, and I feel terrible for him. So in terms of misogyny, because Jane Curtin became the sole anchor in this season, it's not directly said, but there's a general energy with her and how she talks about things and things that happen on the show that have me believing she was facing a severe amount of misogyny, especially as a woman replacing a man in a role on this show.
But there's certainly no question in my mind about the validity of women in any so-called traditional male roles. People are people and should be judged as people.
The ecological community urges the concerned citizens should act now, form groups, write to Congress.
She's not really replacing, but, you know, he left the show, she's in, and now she can't escape being compared to him. Though I personally think that she is a better anchor than Chevy was. I'm assuming in the 70s and even now, being a woman doing the same thing that a man did, I'm assuming you have to work 10 times harder to seem as funny. And she even has moments where she talks about critics, you know, comparing her to Chevy, saying she's not as good. People said they miss sexy Chevy Chase. And I just imagine that's a lot of pressure. And, you know, she does do it gracefully, but I can just feel the discomfort and the awkwardness of being a female comedian. Because, you know, women aren't supposed to be funny, apparently. And I'm assuming that was even worse back in the day. She just had to live up to much higher standards than her male castmates did, which is really sad. I personally look back and I think she did very well with the pressure and even just as a Weekend Update anchor in general. But this causes another famous event in episode 13 where this frustration peaks and she rips open her blouse, exposing her bra because she is tired of people saying they miss sexy Chevy Chase and they're saying that she doesn't have enough sex appeal.
What can I say besides, try these on for size, Connie Chung. If it's Rockville you want, it's Rockville you'll get.
You know, this still exists nowadays, but especially back then, once again. I'm assuming as a female comedian, person on popular media and in entertainment, she was probably expected to have sex appeal. You know, when you're an anchor, she was wearing like button-ups. Like, that wasn't what she was supposed to do. I'm pretty sure she was Catholic. She didn't feel comfortable with that type of stuff. They definitely lean into the misogyny. It actually upsets me because I think the criticism probably got to both her, the executives, the writers, because, you know, this is the only season where it's just her as the sole anchor. They have a male castmate as a co-anchor in the rest of the seasons where she is on Weekend Update, probably to lighten up the criticism. And also, in the rest of the seasons, they often make like slut-shamey jokes, or they just sexualize her a lot, call her a slut, whore, make jokes about her hooking up with people. It's not great, and it makes me really sad that was kind of something that needed to be done for her to continue to anchor at the time. It makes me upset, and I hope things aren't like that.
Now, Weekend Update. Here are anchor persons, Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd. I'm Jane Curtin, here now the news. Our top story tonight. The United Kingdom has successfully created a test tube baby. This is the first of these trials to succeed. Though many have celebrated this, there are critics who fear that women won't want to have sex with men. The female orgasm rate has already grown with the discovery of the clit. More on this as it develops. Pun intended. Star Wars has been gaining more and more superfans. In response to being called a giant nerd, a superfan responded, quote, "I am your daddy. May the force be with you." Unquote. Now here's our entertainment reporter, Bill Murray. Thank you, Jane. The movie Eraserhead has just been released this past week. Now, I have not seen this movie, so I cannot tell you my thoughts on it. However, I will make a guess on what the movie is about purely from the cover and what I've seen about it. So this guy, his name's probably Winston, just a guess. He's not having a good time, no. In fact, he's having such a bad time, he is plotting some real bad schemes. See, this guy is incredibly bitchless, absolutely zero play. And So, with that funky hair of his, which is magic by the way, he begins to erase every man's penis. Then, he gets all the bitches and lives happily ever after. The end. Dan? Very nice bill, thank you. Depression is at an all-time high for young adults age 18 to 25. According to the CDC, this is because of, quote, increasing economic, social, and health crises, unquote. According to me, it's because of those damn phones. In honor of former President Nixon, McDonald's has released the McDicken meal. You can now pull up to any McDonald's drive-thru and hand over any legally pressing audio tapes for a McDicken meal, half off with a cup of water shaped like a gate. E-I-E-I-O. The dancing N has disappeared after last being seen out on the town at Studio 54. Many have been speculating at the possibility of an alphabet killer since the appearance of the walking L and the hungry M just weeks ago. The twerking O has not responded to our request for comment. Australian scientists have just announced that they're working on a vaccine to prevent the spread of pregnancy around the globe. This has sparked controversy between those who are pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine. This will be our topic for tonight on Point Counterpoint. I will be taking the pro-vaccine point, Dan will be taking the anti-vaccine. Pregnancy has been running wild around the globe, affecting billions. This vaccine will protect many from the parasite that is a fetus. Many are saying that that thing is a miracle, yet those have babies that look like sun-dried squash. If I can get a needle in my arm preventing me from such a parasite invasion, I will be participating. Not to mention, you can't do any type of autism argument if the child will never be born. Jane, you 5G wench. These sunny sound upside down Australians are filling up women with microchips. This will further mind control them into activities that a woman has no right participating in. Applying for a credit card, voting Democrat, having premarital sex. Now these folks are not only from down under, but want to bring women down under to hell. You're gonna burn, Jane. That's all the news. Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
We're on season 3. I'm almost halfway there, but also not really. Now, we're on season 3, which is ironic because that rhymes with T, and oh my god, is there a lot of that. But this is when the Chevy Chase and Bill Murray beef escalates. So Chevy Chase, who was a former member of the SNL cast, also was the anchor of Weekend Update, as I did a terrible impression of him. He returned to host the show in episode 11 of this season. And I guess him and Bill, from what I heard, what I read, they already kind of didn't like each other, already had it out for each other a bit. So the rumor is Chevy was becoming a bit frustrated with Bill because, one, he was his replacement, but also obviously Bill Murray became wildly successful, wildly liked. I mean, to this day, more so than Chevy. You know, Bill Murray won the battle and he won the war. He's become, like, extremely beloved in pop culture, though I think they've made up to this day. They've done interviews together, and they were also in Caddyshack together, but I think this was while the beef was going on. So, apparently, before this episode went live during one of the rehearsals, Chevy and Bill got into a fight so bad that it led to them getting physical, like violent with each other. Though, what I've heard, I'm just gonna say it's speculation just for the sake of, you know, not spreading false info. But from what I've heard, it's pretty much confirmed because you can see that Chevy was bruised.
Live from New York, it's Saturday!
They also have talked about their conflict with each other, their problems with each other, and I think they're okay now. Well, apparently Lorraine Newman was the one who first attempted to break them up, but then it was Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi who successfully broke them up, which is really funny to me because, like, that just is so Blues Brothers in my head. I love that movie, so I'm just gonna imagine Blues Brothers any time that I can. But the show still went on, and Chevy did go to reprise his role as anchor for a pretty good episode. Now that I got the excitement going, let me introduce you to the new vibe this season, because Weekend Update got a weekend upgrade this season. Oh yeah. The set is now bigger, there's more space behind them. I think it's more flattering, in broadcast you tend to want more space behind you. That's what I've been told. There's a bigger desk, and they're away from the beige background, which was kind of distracting since the background was so light. It's hard to keep your eyes on something so light. It was a bit more interesting. It's a bit darker, more colorful. Jane Curtin is still an anchor, but this season she co-anchors with Dan Aykroyd, and I really like their dynamic. You can tell that they bounce off each other really well. They're very similar in their comedy style, which makes it pretty easy for them to go back and forth in a way that seems cohesive and doesn't feel forced. They both have a very dry, awkward, witty sense of humor. From what I watch, it's like they have the persona, and like the outward surface of them is serious, but right past that is like a bizarre essence, and I love it. I love that. Now, I do believe Jane could definitely still pull this off as an anchor by herself, but considering it's Dan Aykroyd, I am not too upset at this pairing. But they're so similar that if this segment didn't have cameos from different cast members, I think it would be pretty distracting. So they make up for that with the amount of specialized roles that they give the other castmates. Bill Murray has a segment where he does reviews of popular movies. Bill Murray's Pop Corner. This is my favorite reoccurring thing, but it's enjoyable and it's interesting to see what movies people liked. Some of the movies were Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Miracle on 34th Street, and Coming Home. Coming Home leads to one of his many Vietnam jokes, one of them being they talk about Vietnam so much that even he has PTSD from it, which is a pretty funny joke, I'm not gonna lie.
But after seeing Coming Home, I have to tell you, Jane, I was wrong. I'm not often wrong, but when I am, I'm the first to admit it. I love that about myself. The Vietnam War was a mistake. I don't care how this hurts me, privately or publicly, I believe we should not have fought that war.
This also introduces his Oscar predictions, which became such a popular thing that he did it for the rest of the time he was on the show. I think it definitely added the pop culture ball rolling to the show, and I'll never get mad at people clowning on world leaders, politicians, but a little pop culture is important to a news broadcast. You gotta have a bit of fun. Lorraine Newman has a very bizarre moment in episode 12 with the hosts of the episode. Now, I want you to take a very deep breath and brace yourself, because I don't think you're going to believe me when I say who the host of this episode was. When I tell you this, I just want you to think about what happens decades down the line with this person. It was O.J. Simpson. It was O.J. Simpson who hosted this episode. So his appearance on Weekend Update is an interview with Lorraine Newman in the men's locker room for the football team. And he's shirtless with like a towel on, and he's sweaty, and there's a lot of like weird sexual tension, which is definitely written in on purpose.
I'm very excited to be here, and from the looks of things, it seems the feeling is mutual.
But it's just so uncomfortable, especially knowing like everything that would happen decades later, especially knowing Norm Macdonald was on the show like not even 20 years later is just crazy to me, but okay. And just 5 episodes later, they have Lorraine do a weird hot wax, like the movie segment with Bill, and like this isn't a unique moment for Bill in terms of like weird sexual comments, but it's like a very sexually tense, provocative segment where he's just calling her pet names, and I don't know, just every time Bill Murray calls someone a pet name in this show, it just makes me uncomfortable. Like he's definitely like in that meme, is like Riz versus sexual harassment. He's definitely the sexual harassment, I gotta say.
I'm happy right now when I'm talking to you. Are you happy?
Happy as is happy does, You want me to get that sponge, babe? Get your back here, because
I can do that.
So good luck, you tiny little superstar. Get out of here and go have some fun. You're terrific, Lorraine.
It's just really weird in general how much sexual tension and sex jokes they write in for the women in this show, like all together. It's not just Lorraine. And a lot of this era is really funny to me, don't get me wrong. It does bother me quite a bit how casual the misogyny is. Obviously, this was the 70s, but it's still uncomfortable. It was definitely written to be comedic and, you know, not to be taken too seriously, but it doesn't feel, like, ironic. Like, it's more just exaggerated rather than it being like, oh, this is bad. It's, like, supposed to be like, haha, look at this slut, she's such a slut. Or look at this dude, he's so horny, oh my god. But this happens way more in season 4 and 5 with Jane, because Bill becomes anchor and they write way more sex jokes into it, but I'll get to that. So another concerning thing that happened this season was around Garrett Morris's mental health. Now, he wasn't alone in the fact that the cast were huge partiers who abused hard drugs, you know. It wasn't a healthy way of living, I'll say, though I don't judge. In fact, that's how a lot of the SNL cast members actually died very young. It was because of this, like, culture that existed with abusing drugs and excessive partying. You know, Garrett is still alive, thank God, but hearing that he was dealing with drug abuse and the harsh treatment as a black man is really disturbing. You know, it seems like he's definitely not alone in that. Since he was the only black cast member, he was constantly typecasted into, like, racially stereotypical roles. Chico Escuela was one of these characters. He was a fictional baseball player from the Dominican Republic, and Garrett played him a lot. Like, he has a lot of appearances on Weekend Update. I think more than I can count on both my hands. So this character would give a rundown of sports that week. He would talk in like a stereotypical broken English accent. It's not like insanely bad, but I can see this on top of already being stereotyped for so long in every episode. I could see how that could get to you. I could see that could break. I could see how that could get to him. There was also an odd bit they had this season where Garrett talked about an NBA game where a fight broke out between players. Supposedly, one of them pushed down the other or hit, something like that. There was a conflict on the court.
For last week, another incident of injustice occurred when a black player, for no reason other than his color, was accused of striking a white player. Wait a minute. This version could be deceiving.
This bit was pretty funny, but I can also see how, like, if you're already mentally struggling and dealing with trauma from the racism you face as a black person, this definitely does not help. The basis of the segment was he was saying that the black man was falsely accused of pushing the white man. It was just another case of a black man getting blamed for something violent. In the clip, you can clearly see the man push down the other man. I can see how this could get to someone who's already dealing with discrimination and the trauma you face as a prominent black figure, especially at this time. Also remember that I'm noticing this. I saw a bit of this online from research. I've only watched Weekend Update. I don't watch the entirety of the episodes. I only watch the Weekend Update, and I still notice how typecast he was. He's not even an anchor. He just comes on to do appearances, and that might make it more obvious because I only see characters he does. But sometimes he does come on as different versions of himself, but it's so obvious. This was so bad that it led to him abusing drugs more and more. This caused him to experience hallucinations and mental breakdowns, and it even led to a specific episode on set during a rehearsal. It's just really terrifying. But I looked into it a little bit. Apparently, no other actors, at least on SNL, have experienced the same thing as Garrett. I'm talking about the black actors, of course. though they have shown concern for what happened. So I know that was really serious, but I thought it was really important to acknowledge that that was a thing that was going on, because I don't think Garrett was alone in that. This is most definitely a thing that still happens in the industry. And, I'm talking about the positives, but I'm also talking about the negatives. And, everything has good things you can take and things you can learn and criticize from. So on a positive note, I'm gonna tell you about some of the moments I liked about this season. They added a lot of goofy levels to the production. Not only did they up the production, they made it a little sillier. The introduction is a little more organized. They even have a little jingle before Jane and Dan introduce themselves and start reading. It's like, dun, dun, dun. Though I think they get rid of it in season 5, but I miss the jingle. I like it.
And now, Weekend Update. With the Weekend Update news team, here are co-anchor persons Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin.
And they also have this weird reoccurring character bit thing where in a middle of a broadcast, the dancing N will come out on set.
What's going on here? We have a bulletin coming in on the NBC Dancing N. This is the NBC News Update Dancing N, if I can...
And the dancing N is just supposed to be NBC, the mascot. I don't know. I don't know if there's a joke I'm missing, because I don't really understand what the point of it is, or if I'm supposed to understand. I don't know if it's supposed to be LOL so random humor. It might be. I have no idea. It's silly, I'll take it. So in terms of politics, there isn't too much to comment on at this time, which is sad to me because that is easily my favorite part of the show. But like I said before, Jimmy Carter is now president, and that man is literally zero content. Zero. So a lot of the things they do riff off of past events that still have relevancy. One of the bits is the Sputnik launch, where they show fake footage of the launch, and Dan Aykroyd narrates in a Russian accent. They really were reaching. The biggest political commentary that they do the most often was the relations between Egypt and Israel. During this time, the president of Egypt took a controversial trip to Israel. The two countries had been in a conflict for what I found was a few decades. So this collaboration was a pretty big deal. Geographically, these two countries are right next to each other. They're just across the sea. And it was a big deal to Americans because Israel is still a controversial state to this day. And America, specifically Jimmy Carter, was one of the people facilitating Egypt and Israel to make a peace agreement. This is something that's talked about through the rest of this SNL era because the peace agreement wasn't signed officially until 1979, and then it took effect in the beginning of 1980. It's hard to tell what SNL's opinion on Israel is, if they have one at all. They drop subtle bombs, pun intended, about their acts of violence towards Palestinians, but I feel like generally they also poke fun at the Palestinians too. I don't think I've heard anything too jarring about the Palestinians. I wasn't expecting the most just because it is a comedy show. They make fun of the brutality of Israel, but don't take the time to express sympathy towards Palestinians. I'm not going to clock them for that because, one, this is a comedy segment and it isn't really meant to be taken seriously, and two, because calling out Israel for brutality is already a pretty bold thing to do in general. So this season also introduces the first appearance of easily my favorite bit to come from this era of Weekend Update. Though I don't think they created a name for this segment the first time they do it, they might have, I'll have to check. It soon becomes known as Point Counterpoint. In this, both Jane and Dan assume political roles, both at different ends of the political spectrum. And for you nitpicky nerds out there, I'm talking about the American Overton window spectrum. Don't come for me. I'm normal. I'm talking about normal people in America. Jane takes the role of a bleeding heart liberal, sometimes even going a little Marxist route with it to spice it up. Dan takes the role of a classic conservative, which is scary because he plays it a little too well, but that's acting, I guess. Usually the topics they do are contentious and controversial at the time, even now. They only do 2 this season. One is about economics. just general economics, and then the other one's about abortion.
Dan, you sadistic, elitist, sexist, racist, anti-humanist pig.
Jane, you ignorant, misguided slut. Haven't these bimbos heard of abstinence? I myself haven't had sex for 2 years, and I'm rich. If I'd been around when your mother was carrying you, not only would I have paid for the abortion, but I would have performed it myself.
Though Dan is not the anchor in the next season, and he leaves in season 5, he comes on as an executive, even though he's not anchor anymore. The counterpoints that happen in later seasons are definitely better. This season also emerges a new and beloved character, played by Gilda Radner, Rosanna Dana. These are really funny. She usually appears at the end of a Weekend Update segment to respond to a question from a viewer who is always from New Jersey. As a person of the tri-state area, yes, I was filled with glee when I heard this New Jersey slander. If you ask a Connecticut person what state they hate the most, you're gonna hear mostly New Jersey, which I think is funny. She goes at New Jersey people very hard, but she'll answer their questions anyways, but usually she'll start roasting them. And then she, kind of answers the question. That's, the whole gimmick to Rosanna Dana. She gets asked a question, and then she just goes on a tangent that doesn't really have anything to do with it. And it leads to these huge rants, almost about nothing, and they go, not in circles, they just go, until, she'll, be asked how to deal with seasonal depression, and then she'll start talking about how she got soup and there was a hair in it, and then she met Rodney Dangerfield, and then he told her that Jane Curtin was ugly. It's just bizarre, and then it usually leads to Jane getting mad, and she's like, what does this have anything to do with seasonal depression? And then Roseanne responds, well, Jane, it just goes to show ya. It's always something. If it's not one thing, it's another. If it's not seasonal depression, it's Rodney Dangerfield. It's just like a song my grandma, Nana Rosanna Dana, used to sing to me before bed at night. And then that usually leads to her spitting bars. Honestly, Jane was, bobbing her head during some times, because Roseanne kind of spits bars, I'm not gonna lie. Put Rosanna Dana in a freestyle, epic rap battles of history, get on it.
Well, Jane, it just goes to show you it's always something. Roses are red, pencils are lead. Here's a little poem before you go to bed. Violets are blue, I'll give you a clue. It's something I wrote just for you. Shamrocks are green, corned beef is lean. You're the cutest girl I've ever seen. Daffodils are yellow, Donovan's is bellow. If you were my son, I'd be a jolly good fellow. Tulips are pink, a flower fix my sing. Isn't this fun? What do you think? Carnations are plain, unless the cupcake in the rain. This is really going good. Take it, Jen!
So overall, I don't think this season was anything incredible, but I definitely had fun watching it, and I think this was a good season for Weekend Update to adjust to a higher production quality, to a new political atmosphere. There are new cast members, but they're generally just working through an upgrade, and you can kind of tell. It's not a particularly weak season, but I think it definitely leads for something better to come, which does. Oh, trust me, it does.
Now, Weekend Update. Here are anchor persons Jane Curtin and Bill Murray. I'm Jane Curtin, here now the news. Our top story tonight. New Pope John Paul II has just been selected as the new leader of the Catholic Church. Many are confused by this process, as the Pope is typically selected by God. When asked about this process, Pope John Paul II said, quote, I woke up in the morning and saw that I had not pee-peed my pants for the first time in 6 years. I knew right then I was chosen by God, unquote. Connecticut has been in talks recently, with the rivalry between the Red Sox and Yankees becoming more tense after the Yankees World Series win. Connecticut has been told to, quote, pick a side, unquote. Connecticut's inability to decide has been compared not only to Israel and Egypt's recent relations, but to bisexuals. When asked to comment, Elton John said, quote, please leave me alone, my hot dogs and roast beef are almost done, unquote. The Carter administration has been under fire as they have traveled around the globe. Some of the assistants have been heard saying things like, quote, Amelia Earhart could never have gotten this far, dudes rock, unquote. Earhart has yet to be found for comment. Ford Motor has been under controversy as they've recalled a few different models of their vehicles. This has been attributed to negligence in the workplace environment. Higher-ups have failed to discourage the use of cussy, also known as car pussy. This has led to malfunctions with the exhaust, wiper fluid, and gas mileage. The company has denied allegations of encouraging sex with cars. Today marks the 14th birthday of Quaaludes. In honor of everything it's done for our country, I will sing it happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. Quaalude. Happy birthday to you. Get out of here. I'll see you later. Sony has released a new music device called the Walkman. Here to comment is Weekend Update correspondent Rosanna Dana. Thanks a lot, Jane. Thank you. Mr. Richard Fader from Fort Lee, New Jersey writes in and says, Dear Rosanna Dana, I've got the new Walkman to listen to new music on walks. Why does it keep skipping? Am I supposed to not walk? Is it because I took it to the bathroom and accidentally peed on it? Now, Mr. Fader, you sure ask a lot of questions for someone from New Jersey. But you came to the right person. See, I, Rosanna Dana, listened to the new Pink Floyd album on my Walkman last weekend. I wanted to see what all these hippies were on about. And as I was walking, I stumbled across no man's land, Brooklyn. Then, none other than Jack Nicholson came up to me on the street. I thought I was gonna die. He said, Hey, Rosanna Dana, I'm working on this new movie about a sex cult, and I really want to try out Roseanne. What? What does this have to do with the Walkman? Well, Jane, it just goes to show ya. It's always something. If it's not one thing, it's another. If it's not a Walkman, it's Jack Nicholson. It's just like this little song my uncle, who was a fruit salesman, Banana Rosanna Dana, used to sing to me. When you go outside and there's weird people everywhere, they're in horror movies and they want to be in your underwear. That is why you always have a knife, so a little lady can go out at night. Thank you, Roseanne. That's the news. Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
So my pale ass kept blending in with the green screen. Every time I tried to chroma key, I had to jump through hoops to try to get it to look okay, and it still looked weird. So I got a blue one. Hopefully it'll be easier to chroma because my pale ass is pretty different from blue. Anyways, here we are at season 4. This season is everything that season 3 had been working up to, and I really think that this is the best of the era, the cream of the crop, you know? They really solidify everything they had been working for. Though I do have my criticisms, this was definitely the best format, had good writing, good characters, and they brought in their story topics. It made for a fun segment because there was a lot of running gags, but it also had a bit of this unpredictable factor. There were no new members added to the cast this season that I'm aware of, so I don't have to do all that. This made it easier for them to develop the strong parts of the season without having to rework personalities, create new characters. They included my favorite segments, Point Counterpoint and Rosanna Dana. They also did keep Bill Murray's pop culture commentary. Speaking of Bill Murray, he does become more of an integral part of the show. This is his first season, where he is co-anchor with Jane Curtin. They are also co-anchors in season 5, spoiler alert, if you care about spoilers for Weekend Update. So Dan Aykroyd is still on SNL at this point, but I think he's definitely a better suited personality for cameos rather than a co-anchor. I feel like my prediction or my You know, what I theorized was happening behind the scenes is there was probably a lot of pressure for Bill Murray to have a bigger part in the show since he was such a rising star. I think there was a lot of pressure from fans. I again think this was an attempt to outweigh the misogynist opinions about Jane. I think Dan was that, but Bill Murray was even further that because he was so popular. So first I want to talk about what worked and what the highlights were. Though a lot of new facets are added this season, like sports and pop culture, there's still a lot of great moments to talk about politics, which is my sweet spot, so I'll be talking about that first, sorry. So, we're still in Jimmy Carter's presidency. This season takes place late 1978 to mid 1979, so nearing the end, it's in the second half of Carter's presidency. And if you've learned anything about what I have to say about him, it's that this man is zero content, like, so lame. Like, I don't think he's a terrible person in, like, American president standards, because, you know, the bar is in, like, hell. But, oh my god, I have no way to make fun of this guy. And he's also literally on his deathbed as I'm writing this and recording this. So if he's dead by the time this comes out, I'm really sorry. I'm not trying to speak ill on the dead. I promise. I would never do that. So since it's nearing the end, the latter half, if you will, of Carter's presidency, talks of midterms are rising. You know, we're kind of in that period right now. We're kind of in the same timeline in terms of a president's, you know, term, like cycle, president term life. I don't know if there's life stages. We're kind of in a similar stage to where they were in this season right now. Like, talks of midterms are rising, yet not much has been really solidified in terms of who's candidates, but it's probably gonna come up pretty soon. It doesn't really get too fun in terms of midterms until the next season because that's when it really starts to wrap up. But it's speculated that former President Gerald Ford is running and people are pushing for Ted Kennedy to run for some reason. I literally know nothing about Ted Kennedy except that he's JFK's brother. So apparently this is not true. He actually has no relation to JFK. He is just some guy. And I really couldn't give a shit about him, honestly. I think they were looking for him to run as a Republican. I don't know. Because it seems like it kind of falls through. So Weekend Update is still kind of on their like South Park way of going about politics where they just shit on everything, which is fine. Like, it's okay to like make fun of everything. I think if you're gonna make fun of something, at least just make fun of everything at that point. Not that I think that always results in the best jokes, but because there is like the fun of speculation, I feel like they're able to play off the speculation pretty well, so that leads to some pretty fun segments and bits. The main show in politics right now is the international politics, and I know that sounds boring as fuck, but it's kind of messy. It's kind of messy out there. So Egypt and Israel have been, you know, a talk in the show. At this point, they had been in conflict for so long, but it was around this time where Jimmy Carter helped negotiate a peace treaty between the two countries. So this is a pretty big deal to people because, you know, there's people who are critics of, you know, Israel and like people who are Israel stans and like just people who feel a certain type of way about conflicts in the Middle East.
If this doesn't get that cracker clown reelected, I don't know what the hell will.
So I'm not the most well versed on this particular conflict, but I do know that Carter did get a ton of shit for this because he was like one of the main mediators at getting the treaty signed, and you know it then went into effect in 1980. Of course, perfect as he sit right in front of me. So Weekend Update still continues to confuse me a bit with the Israel takes. They aren't exactly clear, which I guess makes sense because you get a lot of backlash for being anti-Israel. even on the liberal side of things. But they do make a lot of bombing jokes, so which is pretty big for like a liberal show. So I do have to give them that. I think I said the same thing for last season, but that has continued. They've been about the same with their Israel jokes. Okay, so this one is way out of my territory, but one of the things they talk about this season in almost every episode is the selection of the new pope. So if you know anything about me, I was not raised religious. Most of my family is Catholic, but neither of my parents were going to church anymore by the time I was born. So religion's a bit out of my league, and I tend to be a bit out of knowledge with religion. And I've managed to offend mostly Christians without even trying. I feel like I could probably do the same even if I was raised in the church, but whatever. So they do make fun of the Pope a lot for being old as fuck. The main jokes are them celebrating like the milestones of him as the Pope. For example, like they celebrate him making over 30 days in the role.
And to celebrate the occasion, he excommunicated a 9-year-old boy.
Because I guess there was one pope who died after like 30 days of being pope. They also joke about making pizza at the Vatican. And, you know, I love a good cook at a pizza joke. You know, always gets me. They also talk about an event in Mexico. I don't even know if this is real. I guess the Vatican held an event in Mexico and they start talking about pickpocketing. Then they have this one character who's introduced this season, who's easily my least favorite, Guido Sarducci. They have him talk about it. Now, I don't really know who plays him, and I don't really care, because honestly, Guido Sarducci is lame as fuck. It's literally the most unfunny bit I've seen on the show.
Is that thousands of pickpockets and swindlers have descended on that city to steal from the people who came to watch the Pope.
You're making fun of Italians and you do it wrong. Like, it's right there. It's right there. He's like a stereotypical Italian man in a trench coat with like a cigarette, and he speaks in an Italian accent. But, like, then he rambles about things and it's, like, not even funny. And it literally got to the point where I was watching, and every time Guido Sarducci would show up, I would just skip through his parts altogether because I was just so bored with them. So that was unfortunate. But that was only the really, like, terrible thing I had to say about this season, besides, like, misogyny, but we'll get to that. They also like to talk about the Shah of Iran. So I'm not going to Google this. I'm literally just going to tell you what I know just from watching the show because I think that's funnier. So what it seems is this guy was the leader of Iran, who, I'm presuming, not a good dude. He was violating human rights. There was a revolution. He was then exiled from the country. So from this, there are jokes about where he went after exile. The jokes are that he's, like, fine. He's on, like, a paid vacation in, like, this luxury beach resort. Like,
Tehran's Revolutionary Tribunal announced that anyone in the world was free to assassinate the Shah of Iran and his family hiding in exile. Tell that would-be assassin what else he might win, Don Pardo.
Well, Jane, the lucky assassin will be flown non-stop to Mecca on his Islamic Airlines luxurious super Mecca jet cruiser.
the joke is basically that he's exiled, but, like, he's fine. Cars are also a big running bit in this season because not only are they still in the energy crisis, sorry I have a lisp, it's my last week of Invisalign, but there are also a ton of car recalls at this time. So we can update pokes fun at Ford Motors and GM because they recalled a lot of different models of cars. So this was a pretty big deal because the recall was because of criminal negligence on the company's parts. And I'm pretty sure people actually got hurt from the defects and the negligence in the cars, so.
The Ford Motor Company's Pinto division this week demonstrated its new Pinto tractor.
Pretty big deal. And then they also joke a lot about ExxonMobil because of gas prices, you know. Sounds familiar. And they also joke about how these gas companies are also profiting off of crisis. Once again, sounds familiar. I'm always for making fun of companies that screw people over and profit off of terrible times. So, you know, I was like beating my chest like an ape. Woo, woo, woo. That shit gets me monkey brained as fuck. Woo, woo, make fun of company. Woo, woo, ExxonMobil bad. Apes together strong. Studio 54 is also something that they have brought up continuously throughout the show. So Studio 54 was an elaborate, elite, famous nightclub in New York City. So I didn't really feel the need to talk about it much before, but they kept bringing it up, so I assumed that it was culturally significant at this time. Rosanna even does her own segment about how she went there to dance. You know, she joked about how she had to know someone to get in. She talked about how wild it was in there, how she wanted to shake her little booty, and she was like, there were girls dancing with girls, guys dancing with guys, girls dancing with guys that look like girls, guys dancing with girls that look like guys, just like hyping it up. And I don't know if this club was actually publicly raved about like this, or if like this was just like the SNL people being like huge partiers, so just like talking about it a lot. I'm guessing the latter, because they were very well known for their excessive partying. So they have a lot of things that they talk about where I'm like, damn, nothing has changed since the 70s. They talk about McDonald's a lot and how questionable the food quality is. I eat McDonald's, so, and I be bisexual, eat hot chip and lie, don't get me wrong, so I'm not judging anyone. But we Americans, we never change. I sure don't, because that shit tastes good. The joke they make is that they use literal worms to make their burgers. So I didn't find this incredibly funny, but I'm sure that's because at this point that's definitely been overdone. I'm gonna assume that for the time this was a really funny joke. They also like to talk about depression and during the holiday season a lot, and Rosanna Dana takes on this with her remedy for depression and gives Jane a fruitcake to help with her depression, and then Jane proceeds to eat it, and then she looks disgusted.
I got you this nice little gift for Christmas. I got you a little fruitcake. I didn't forget about your problem. But Mr. Fetter, you gotta take the bad with the good. It's just like the holiday advice passed down to me by my grandmother. You can just throw that out, it still tastes good. She used to say, life is just like a fruitcake. When you look at it, it's rich and sweet with honey and sugar.
But Roseanne was very nice for doing it because Jane has showed that she gets kind of annoyed by Roseanne. So my favorite editorial this season is a Dan Aykroyd one about Red China. Oh my god, has this aged so beautifully? He sounds exactly like conservatives sound today, which I'm sure sounded exactly like the conservatives in the 70s. This is just another moment where he goes on like a goofy ass rant with his like serious tone, but this one literally had me in tears laughing. This was a really funny bit. So he goes on to talk about how he doesn't want Coca-Cola or McDonald's going to China, which is really funny. He thinks that like it should stay American culture, which is really funny. Also, I forget what the context this was in, but he says a line and he just goes, here a duck, there a duck, everywhere a duck duck.
I'm talking about the American plan to export to China massive shipments of a certain dark-colored sugar phosphorus soft drink in a red and white can, and a certain double patty hamburger with a brand name we all heard as children in a song about a certain farmer who had here a duck, there a duck, everywhere a duck duck. We've only known them for a couple of weeks, and here we are already, freely imparting to them the very secrets and formulas that are the hallmarks in the American identity.
And I don't know why, but that line was just so funny to me, and I've just kept quoting it since I've seen it. But no one knows what I'm talking about when I say that, but it's still funny to me. So Bill Murray also has some good moments on this season. I know I've shat on him a little bit. So one of my favorite jokes was during a story about the Pope. He begins to talk about Jesus and the famous Last Supper, you know, like the Bible. I guess he wanted to buy the receipt of, you know, the bill of the Last Supper while he was at the Vatican, but he didn't have money for it, so he instead bought the receipt for the last brunch.
I didn't even know it was the last surprise, you know? As you went to me, I went to the seminary, everything.
It was a stupid joke, but I love a good play on words, and I love a good making fun of old stories. And then a running gag that Bill Murray does is he sings happy birthday, usually to celebrities. So I'm assuming this was a very popular bit because he does this a lot. So it seems like the crowd was like apes beating on the chest for this one, like I am for when they make fun of companies.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. Relativity. Get out of here.
But honestly, it was kind of funny. It was like a good like running joke. You're like, oh my god, who is he gonna sing happy birthday to today? You know, this tends to be for celebrities, often dead ones. The one that sticks out the most is when he takes like a head statue of Albert Einstein and sings happy birthday to that. So Rosanna Dana, I gotta mention her a little more. She does get a lot of screen time this season, and you know, that makes sense because she is one of the most iconic characters Weekend Update has had to date. She's definitely one of the most recognizable. Gilda Radner is a queen, she slays, and she's just extremely funny. Even though this bit is like extremely formulaic, it still works. And I love the New Jersey slander. I do love a good New Jersey slander. It's really funny to me as a person from the tri-state area. And then Lorraine Newman has a character that only shows up once and then never again, like not even in other seasons. She shows up as like an emo. The character's name's Z Jones, and she shows up to talk about rock music. And I understand why she only showed up once because honestly this bit was not good, but like, hear me out. So now we're gonna ease our way into misogyny, and I know that probably excited a lot of you. So point counterpoint continues into this season, but this time Dan Aykroyd acts as just the station manager rather than the co-anchor. This continues to be the best segment on Weekend Update. The best one from this season, in my opinion, was the cocaine one, where Jane was pro-cocaine and Dan was anti-cocaine and anti-drugs in general. So he starts like calling drug users degenerates and, you know, all that stuff. And then he also says the iconic line, "Jane, you ignorant slut." You know, everyone loves that line. Though, that one is definitely satirical. It's satirical misogyny. I give it the pass.
Jane, you ignorant slut. Jane, you ignorant slut. Jane, you poor misguided scrag. Jane, you ignorant slut. Jane, you magnificently ignorant slut. Jane, you ignorant slut. Let's really make killer dope, and rid the world of drug-dependent degenerates. Then we can turn our full attention to dried-up, hagged-out, ignorant sluts like yourself.
The misogyny does, however, get weird around Bill Murray. So in this season and the next, they give innuendos that Bill and Jane are hooking up. So it just comes off as awkward. Like, it's a little funny because it's just like they're like swapping clothes they left at each other's houses. And it's like funny, but like it does go deeper for Jane because there are other moments in the show where they joke about her like sleeping around, having a ton of casual sex, and like wanting to fuck male celebrities and her just acting horny. And I'm pretty sure she was like a Catholic during this time. She might still be, but like this was definitely like not true to her like real person character. And also the vibe around Bill is just weird. He's just like weird around women on this show. Just anytime he has a bit with a woman, the vibe is weird. I have to say. That's my thoughts on season 4. One more season to go.
Now, Weekend Update. Here are anchor persons Jane Curtin and Bill Murray. I'm Jane Curtin, here now the news. Our top story tonight. Protests against the Winter Olympics set to take place in Moscow have continued. As Soviet tensions continue to rise, many Americans feel that it is unsafe to attend this event. Head coach of the figure skating team says, quote, "I ain't afraid of no commie," unquote. President Carter has been facing controversy for his decision not to attend the funeral of Yugoslav President Josip Broz Tito. The Yugoslav leader was in a coma for the past couple of months. Many believe that just one kiss from President Carter could have woken him up and turned him into a princess. In response to this, Carter said, "Meh." Radioactivity in cows has become a concern after recent nuclear accidents. The FDA says this may affect the safety of milk consumption. Many Americans have grown fear that they cannot enjoy their daily glass of milk. I say this is natural selection. The Pope has recently called out American celebrities for anti-Italian racist attitudes. Called Fritophobia, Italians have grown concerned about stereotypes and caricatures. When asked to comment, these Fritophobians said, quote, "Hey, I cooked the pizza," unquote. I gotta say, that's one spicy meatball. The census for 1980 has just been released by the federal government. In this, we have learned that the average penis size is actually 3 inches and the average time to orgasm is 1 minute. Great to know I'm above average. Former President Gerald Ford has finally announced that he will not be running for president again, despite pressures he has given into the backlash like a little baby. When asked to comment, he said, quote, "Wah," unquote. He is now taking a nap after a long day of pooping himself. As the 1980s continue, we are figuring out what life will look like. On this is social scientist Ali Franken. Thank you, Jane. In the first couple weeks of the 80s, former President Nixon has moved to a house in New York. And I know you may be thinking, how is this affecting me, Ali Franken? Well, you see, this is highly disturbing to me, as I, Ali Franken, live only a choo-choo train ride away. I believe in the Ali Franken decade, people will be more aware of their proximity to me. To help me in this endeavor, I ask you to slow down your showers. If you are in an area in close proximity to me, in that case, people like Mr. President Nixon will be deterred from me, Ali Franken. As the Ali Franken decade continues, I hope to update you with good news regarding me, Ali Franken. Jane? Thank you, Ali. That's the news. Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Alright, so our last season of this era is season 5. Now, this one still has Jane Curtin and Bill Murray as co-anchors. And to first put out my thoughts, I think this season is still strong, but not as it was in the season before. I think you can tell that a lot of the actors are getting kind of worn because, you know, they do leave after this season and they're probably looking to do other projects. And personally, I don't blame them, because Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi left like after season 4 finished, so they did lose those cast members who definitely brought a vibe to the show that is missing. Bill Murray also has this "I'm completely faced" joke.
I am faced, so let us both slide on this. God, am I faced? Jane, are you as faced as I am? I am completely faced.
I don't really know why, but he just goes on like, "I'm so faced. I'm completely faced." The crowd was like going crazy. Like, again, like the ape brain was coming out, and I was like, what? This is so weird. Bill Murray has a lot of very odd moments where I'm like, where the fuck did this come from? There's also a weird moment where they're talking about a Playboy photo shoot, and then Bill is like teasing Jane about a Polaroid he took of her that he could submit to Playboy, which is like really bad. It feeds into like the innuendos, but like too much. This is it going a little too far. So Bill Murray has a racist joke once again. He says something is like, "What do you call a black person, a Puerto Rican, and a fat person? Huey, Louie, and the blimp." No? Maybe don't? I don't fucking know. That one I was like, are you for real? They just go way too goddamn far in this season. And then Bill has this nasty ass cough in the 10th episode this season. Like this nasty ass cough while Jane is reading a story. It's like
On behalf of President Carter to raise support for the Olympic boycott. God bless you.
It's like wet as fuck. And then Jane just like is able to pause and be like, God bless you. So, you know, credit to her for being able to play off that nasty ass cough. Because, oh my god, that was so fucking gross. Bill Murray also gets into misogyny, where he talks about if women had to register for the draft. And he said they should have women register for the draft, because then if they lose to Russia, they can be like, oh, you just beat a bunch of girls. How could you? That's literally the joke. How could you beat a bunch of fragile women? Oh my god. That's a thing. So there's a new CBS anchor. There's just a running joke that Jane wants to like fuck him, and then Bill just gets jealous. But they like constantly egg on that she's like horny for this old man.
Cronkite shown here with a local hose bag. Jane, just what did you have to do to get Mr. C to pose with you?
Bill, I don't have to tell you a thing. As a journalist, I'm protected by the First Amendment.
Well, good. At least you used some protection.
And it's just, I just find it very weird. Like, it's really not that funny to like make a woman look like a slut. Like, I mean, I guess like you can make fun of someone for like being attracted. I don't know. It just rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't done very well. So Bill continues his happy birthday bit where he sings happy birthday to people. He sings happy birthday to Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. And then he also sings happy birthday to the 1-year anniversary of the 3 Mile Island nuclear radiation leak, which was a big deal back then because it radiated a lot of like cows and a lot of things around it. It affected a lot of people because, you know, radiation is bad. It affected like livestock. Though singing happy birthday to a nuclear leak is pretty fucking funny, I'm not gonna lie. And then they once again tease the birthday thing by mentioning it's Hitler's birthday, and then they all kind of like look at each other like, we're not singing happy birthday to that guy like that.
We at Weekend Update would like to use the occasion to state that we have never agreed with Mr. Hitler's policies and have come to the conclusion that he was a very bad person in almost every way.
I'm like, I don't even know why they had to do that, but at least they didn't sing happy birthday to him, I guess. So it was a weird joke. And then there's one episode where Bill is just asleep on the desk.
With the Weekend Update news team, here are anchor persons Bill Murray and Jane Curtin.
The episode Asleep on the Desk. Now, I don't know why they chose to do that. It is pretty funny, and it was like finally something a little different and goofy. I don't really know what the reasoning was for it, but they did do that. And then there's someone who, he's not new to the show, but he's new to having a Weekend Update segment. Now this person is Al Franken. So if you don't know who Al Franken is, he was an SNL writer, and he does occasionally make appearances on the show. He was also a Minnesota senator from 2009 to 2018. He became a politician. Now he's actually pretty cool. I looked into him a bit, and he's actually like, he's chill. I fuck with Al Franken. I'm rocking with Al Franken. Tell me if I'm wrong. I don't know the most about him, but like, from what I could see, his politics not bad. So Al Franken's big thing this season is the change from the 70s to the 80s, because this season does take place at the end of 1979, and then it goes through mid 1980. So his bit is that the 70s was all about me, me, and then the 80s are going to be the Al Franken decade. Everything's going to be about him, Al Franken.
I know a lot of you out there thought to yourselves, I wonder how this is going to affect Al Franken. And I think that people like me, Al Franken, who succeed and make a lot of money, well, we're really the brightest people and the most talented people, and we deserve to live better than those of you who lag behind. Al Franken decade.
So I find this joke funny because it's kind of fucking stupid, but I like that he ends like every sentence. I know what you're thinking. How's this gonna affect me? Al Franken. And it just shows his name on screen every time. I find that pretty funny. Guido Sarducci also doesn't go the fuck away this season, and he just like talks about the Pope a lot. He literally just talks about the Pope. I don't know, I keep skipping it, but there was also a sketch where he stood right outside of former President Nixon's new a like apartment or like house in New York City trying to get an interview, and he's just not showing up. I really didn't understand the point of that. Like, he was trying to get an interview, but he never shows up, obviously, because like, why the fuck would he do an interview with Guido Sarducci? But it just like went on for way too goddamn long, and it was like kind of boring. They also have Chico Escuela a lot in this season, who's played by Garrett Morris, and he's just a fake Dominican baseball player that they have do sports. I think I talked about him in past seasons, but I mean, I guess it's kind of funny, but doesn't feel good next to like the other racist jokes that are being made, and knowing that Garrett Morris was very racially typecasted. So speaking of politics, this season is still taking place during President Jimmy Carter's turn, but it's really approaching the end this time, making it primary time. Oh yeah. This makes for wonderful characters, especially in the Republican primary race. Because Carter does run for re-election, and that basically makes the Democratic spot a sweep, because usually incumbents have the advantage, especially in a primary race. So Gerald Ford, who was president before Jimmy Carter, decided not to run. And this was actually very funny to me because it had been speculation for so long. And from studying journalism and political science, this is actually something that politicians do. They'll kind of run things through the media to put out and get public opinion to see like what choice they should or shouldn't make. And just knowing that he did that and then decided not to run means like no one wanted him to fucking run. They were like, no. Which is really funny to me. And like Weekend Update had been on to him. They knew his ass was not going to run. So he was trying to get support and everyone was like, hell fucking no. Like, no. So another funny candidate was Ted Kennedy, who again, there's a few jokes with him. The first is that he just gets zero coverage and he's like nowhere to be found. He announced he was running and then basically just like fell off the face of the earth. No one was hearing about him. So like, yeah, good luck. Good luck, Charlie. They also make fun of his relationship with his wife because they like seem to not be close, and they're always like, yeah, his wife doesn't know where he is either. So it's just like bad husband and wife jokes and him just like not being there jokes.
Presidential contender Ted Kennedy was hit in the left shoulder with an egg.
I guess Reagan also has a Freudian slip or a senile moment where he calls Ford a communist. And even his own crowd of like his cult following is like, hey, yo, what? Like, what's this bloke on about? What's this bloke on about? Pip pip. Reagan does like the typical like old ass politician, basically senile, saying dumb things that make no sense. Nothing new, nothing old, you know, still a thing. Speaking of Ted Kennedy, he crashes his car. I don't really have much to say about that, except I kind of have to laugh a little bit. They have a really weird sketch this season where they show up at a Korean surprise dinner party, which leads to this really bad racist Asian sketch where they make fun of Asian accents and mannerisms. It was really cringy. Like, I don't know why they thought this one was okay. I really don't. This was just bad. It was bad. Like, it was just stereotypes and just terrible. So one thing they talk about a lot that I find funny is they make fun of the amount of assassination attempts against Fidel Castro. If you don't know, he survived, I don't even know how many. I think it was at least 60 assassination attempts by the US. So they tried to come up with their own stories of how America tried to assassinate him. Like one of them was he was eating animals. So I find that pretty funny because it is ridiculous how much they did try to assassinate Fidel Castro. Pretty easy to make jokes. You can make up pretty creative stories and they will probably make sense because honestly, America probably tried it. And then the Yugoslav president is in like bad condition during this time. I think he eventually dies. He's in a coma. And they kind of transition their Francisco Franco jokes over to this guy. So they kind of just make fun of this guy who's dying instead of the last guy who died. This is pretty important during this time because Carter gets criticized for not going to his funeral. It's just a controversial thing because Yugoslavia was a very controversial topic. And then one of the big things, the Winter Olympics, I think they're set to take place in 1982. They're set to take place in Moscow. And there's a lot of boycotts because obviously, you know, they don't want to do that in the Soviet Union and they feel that is dangerous. So there are boycotts for a long fucking while. And they joke about the NBC president commenting because they are set to broadcast the Olympics. They also have a joke about gold prices because I guess inflation is a huge thing at this time where gold's becoming scarce. And then the joke with this is that anyone who has gold in their name at any point is worth their weight in gold. Like if they weigh themselves, they can get that amount of gold. Or that's how much they're worth. I don't know. I don't know if they're planning on harvesting people's organs. It's pretty odd. They also have a good moment where they talk about the Eleanor Roosevelt lesbian rumors that have been pretty basically confirmed that she was like having an affair with this news reporter. They do joke about that.
The lovers had pet names for each other, Mrs. Hickok calling Mrs. Roosevelt Dave, and Mrs. Roosevelt referring to Mrs. Hickok simply as Wild Bill.
And I don't know if you can tell how I feel about queer jokes on this show, but it's very hit or miss. But, you know, I feel it is kind of a hit. It's kind of a hit. Another big deal is the DC-10 plane crash. They talk about this quite a lot, and it does sound similar to like other types of plane crashes that have been in the news. Though they kind of go wacky with it, where they're saying that the blame was not put on airlines and instead the passengers who decided to take the plane. I don't know. I found them talking about this one kind of odd. They talk a lot about the Cambodia hunger issue, which definitely gets into weird racist territory also. They talk about Mrs. Carter visiting the Cambodian starving kids. And it just gets weird. It does get weird. Bill Murray does like weird black people jokes and like an all black people look the same joke. No. There was also a Pentagon false alert for Soviet missile attacks, which I find that funny to make fun of because like Well, also this time, like, people were really panicked about missiles coming from Cuba. So this once again follows back into the Castro jokes. Obviously, it never happened, but people were really paranoid about that. They do make a pretty funny joke about McDonald's. They stopped providing plastic stirrers because people are using them for cocaine. I find that pretty funny because what the fuck? That's pretty crazy. Now, for this season, I did have a lot of criticisms. There were a lot of, like, yikes moments in this season compared to the last. This definitely wasn't one of my favorites. It did have some funny moments, and, you know, they did do well with the amount of content they had right in front of them. However, they went a little too far with certain jokes, and it didn't age well, for sure. It probably wasn't good at the time either. So now, I've talked about every season. I gave a bit of roundup, and now I'd like to give some final thoughts of this first era of Weekend Update. Now, I plan to do more on the other eras. At first, I was planning on doing this video of all Weekend Update in general. However, this did become a huge fascination, and I felt I needed to break down in eras and specifically talk about different things in each era and have just a focus on that. Otherwise, this was going to take fucking forever. It already is. I've been working on this since January. But honestly, this era is pretty solid. I am going to remember a lot from this era, and this is going to be something that sticks with me. I'm not going to lie. I do have my criticisms, but the jokes made here, and honestly, like, this taught me a lot about history. I feel like pretty well versed in what was going on in the 70's now. So if you're into comedy and history, I'd say check this out. Maybe look up some old clips on YouTube. I watched the whole thing on Peacock, but there are, like, plenty of clips on YouTube for you to watch from this era. Now, I really did enjoy watching Weekend Update. And that's not to say that I'm not going to continue when I get into the other eras, but this does set a pretty high bar for the other eras. The whole reason I wanted to make this video in the first place is because I wanted to defend Weekend Update, because often I see from, like, all sides that they're just calling it cringe, liberal bullshit, and it is, but Weekend Update is just consistently funny, and I have really liked looking into it, and I find the format fascinating, and I think it really captures a lot of the things I'm interested in. And this era specifically already had a lot of actors that I was familiar with and really enjoy, so I'm really pumped that I got to learn more about them, where they started, and also get an idea of how to make fun of journalists, because I am a journalist and I like making fun of myself. Now, do I think the next era is going to be better than this one? No. Do I think there's going to be other eras that are better than this one? Yes. I do have expectations that my enjoyment of this era is going to be beat in eras to come. I'm really excited to talk about Norm Macdonald's Weekend Update, because he was very controversial with the way he did it, and I love it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was my first attempt at a video essay. I hope it was okay. I hope it was good. I hope you liked it. I hope you want me to talk about more, go into the other eras. This video has been very special to me, and making it has been very special to me. I've been very busy, otherwise this probably would have come out way sooner. I've only been able to work on this during free time. But this has become a project that means a lot to me, and I hope I get to do more things like this in the future, because this is really where my heart lies. I do like deep dives into topics about pop culture, politics, all that. I hope I get to do more of it in the future. I hope you liked this. If you want to see more, subscribe, comment, like, I don't know. And I'll see you the next time I upload, or you can come back whenever I do a next era of Weekend Update. Bye.
Hi, I'm Ben Shapiro, and I'm asking you to subscribe to the Ali is Crying YouTube channel. The Ali is holding a Nerf Super Soaker to my head, threatening me, please subscribe. And she says to follow her on Twitch to watch her live. That's twitch.tv/Ali is Crying. Ali says, bye, wall, please help me.